Hi, folks. There's increasing talk lately about Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, as being a possible replacement for Biden, or even a replacement for Kamala Harris if she ascends to the top of the ticket. So either a presidential candidate or a vice presidential candidate. And of course, the reason why they're thinking about him seriously, among others, is that he is the governor of a key swing state of Pennsylvania, where I reside. In fact, I reside close to Scranton, which is Biden's hometown, ironically. Anyway, here's the Scranton Times, the local newspaper. If you could see the headline here, it talks about the possibility that Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, could replace Biden on the ticket. Now, I think I want to convey to you, without getting political about this, that there's something to think about of having Josh Shapiro as either president or vice president. He originally was the attorney general of the state of Pennsylvania and then became governor, springboard to governor from that. Now, while attorney general, his platform and also as governor, the platforms included he was a crime fighter. He was a tough prosecutor going after criminal elements and all that. But a lot of people don't know about the Ellen Greenberg story. Now, this happened a number of years ago. She was a Philadelphia school teacher, 27 years old, and she was found stabbed to death in her apartment in a Philadelphia suburb. 20 stab wounds, 10 in the front, including one right through the heart, and then 10 more in the back and the neck, and even up in the upper part of the neck, where it'd be hard for her to reach as a self-inflicted suicide. And an independent forensic pathologist later determined that at least one of those wounds, at least one of them, was post-mortem. It was after she had died. Now, the parents well, before I get to that, here's something interesting also. The medical examiner originally declared it a homicide. A little while after that, he was talked to by the Philadelphia Police Department and by the district attorney's office. And after that talk, he was persuaded to change his finding from homicide to suicide. And there are so many glaring things about the case that should have been investigated and were not, were ignored or whatever. So the parents, got themselves a lawyer, spending a lot of money trying to come to the truth, at least get a professional investigation, which never happened. They brought it to Josh Shapiro, who was the attorney general of the state of Pennsylvania at the time. Brought to him first and asked him to review the case. Quick review of it. Nah, nothing to see here, folks. Clear-cut suicide. They brought it to him a second time. Same conclusion. Suicide. That's it. There's no evidence indicating anything else. And that was that. The parents are still pursuing the case, still trying to get depositions together of all those who were involved in declaring it a suicide to find out what really happened. At the very least, this deserves a thorough, professional, competent investigation, which never happened. That's all the parents are asking for, either to declare it a homicide or, at the very least, undetermined. Now, I've done a series of investigative reports on this, which I'm about to show you. So I'd like you to consider it. Look them over, analyze them carefully, and see what you think about whether this really is a convincing suicide. And if you're not convinced, the question to ask is, why was Josh Shapiro convinced? And if you come to the conclusion that he had no good reason to be convinced, then you have to ask if you want this man to become president or even vice president. Hey, folks, with us once again are the parents of Ellen Greenberg, Sandy and Josh Greenberg, who are now observing the 13th anniversary of their daughter's death, which the authorities have insisted to this day is a clear-cut suicide, when so much evidence, compelling evidence, appears to point to just the opposite. So, Sandy and Josh, where does your case stand now while you're still mourning your daughter's death? For 13 years now, you've been stonewalled by a variety of authorities and a variety of offices, but maybe there's some clear sailing ahead. So where does it stand now? What's happened?
I'm trying to find the right words to say.
Basically, there have been a number of things favorable and one thing unfavorable. The unfavorable was an upper level court ruling that Sandy and I do not have standing to bring this matter to trial.
Right.
On the other side of the same ruling, there was 32 pages where they say we should find out what happened to our daughter. We have every right to that, and it should happen.
That was the Commonwealth Court. I'm just explaining it for the people who may not have all the details. Commonwealth Court ruled last year that you did not have standing to challenge the medical examiner's finding that it was a suicide rather than a homicide, a murder, or undetermined. Even though the parents, they claimed, the court claimed, 2 out of the 3 judges claimed you had no standing. However, all 3 judges agreed that the investigation was very flawed and more should be done to investigate the case. So it was kind of an odd ruling that they wouldn't give you a standing, yet they recognized, all 3 judges recognized that it was a very poor investigation into your daughter's death. So what's happened since then, Josh?
Well, a local judge has finally made the city give us the police records.
Good.
So we have more evidence, and we have supposedly we have more evidence. Let's put it that way. Also, supposedly we have the evidence that the police have. We are also going ahead with our lawsuit against the 3 medical examiners who we believe willfully tried to cover up a homicide by calling it a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
And our attorney is preparing to do depositions, which I believe will start with Guy DeAndrea, who was the first one who really looked at this case and said something's wrong here, while he was working for the city of Philadelphia as a assistant district attorney.
Right. Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, he brought to light some of the irregularities with it.
And to this day, he has done podcasts. He has done call-me-ins and things like that to support that.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we have filed with the Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania to get what we want, which is to go to trial.
Okay, now also there's depositions that could begin as well.
Correct, starting with Guy DeAndrea.
All right, well that could lead to new evidence. Now, an interesting sidelight to this is that last year it ended up in the Chester County DA's hand. It was kicked over to them because Josh Shapiro, the then Attorney General, rather than the governor, the then Attorney General, was accused.
He thought there might be a conflict of interest, which he discussed just before the election, 4.5 years after he had the case under his scrutiny.
Yeah, and did nothing but reaffirm the finding of suicide. And for those not familiar with the details, there were 20 stab wounds, 10 in the front, including right through her heart, 10 in the back, even her neck way up there, which would have been hard to reach. 20 stab wounds altogether, clear-cut suicide. And they all stuck with that finding. But
parenthetically, Larry, we have never seen a scintilla, I learned a new word, of evidence that the Attorney General produced. In fact, some of this stuff is so absurd. On the anniversary of Ellen's death, what's his name?
Christopher Phillips.
Christopher Phillips was going to release a press release saying that he could tell Ellen was suicidal on the day of the suicide. Absurd. I mean, the man has no psychiatric, has no psychological, there's no appearance. They never even called Ellen's psychiatrist to find out what the psychiatrist had to say about all this. And the psychiatrist is a medical legal expert who worked with Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And knew Ellen.
Members of Josh Shapiro's Attorney General's staff, none of them had psychological degrees and training.
As far as we know.
And they were claiming that she might have been suicidal because of alleged searches on her computer, which are very questionable.
Yes, the FBI said there were none.
Yeah.
When the city of Philadelphia turned the computer over to the FBI said no. And also, you have to remember, it's best to remember that the chain of custody of that computer and other things of hers, other personal possessions, were taken out of the apartment by
The fiance's uncle.
Uncle Schwartzman. So that means the chain of custody theoretically was broken.
Yeah. All right. Now,
Which means anything on the computer may be questionable.
also getting back to the Chester County DA, who was Deb Ryan at the time, was
Right.
over into her lap, but now she ran for election. She's a judge now, and there's a new DA in town in Chester County, and there's been no contact from him to you, correct?
None.
To Josh and I directly.
No.
However, there's a lot of digging that reporters can do about the connection between Deb Ryan and Josh Shapiro.
Specifically?
Oh, yeah.
You can dig that up. I'm not going to do your work for you.
Okay. There have been a number of allegations that there were some connections there that
Well,
had
there's a number of conflicts of interests within the administration when Josh Shapiro was the Attorney General, and connections between Deb Ryan and Josh Shapiro. And that's what good reporters do, is they'll find that out.
Now, you were interviewed by Deb Ryan's office before she became a judge. That was
Right.
Yes.
And how extensive was that? How detailed was that? How useful was that
To whom?
to you in your case?
Not very. They didn't seem to know much.
They didn't seem to know much, and we never got any feedback after. Questions, concerns, could we elaborate on this and that? They were writing furiously as we were giving them details, and basically
We didn't feel they
that
had
was an
any.
afternoon, and then nothing. I don't feel anything.
We don't feel they had anything. We don't even feel that the Attorney General gave them anything of his, because he had nothing of his. That's what we think.
So I'd like to know what they were doing. They were just wasting time in our lives.
And they still are.
So you didn't hear from them after that initial interview?
No.
And the new guy in town, the new DA, you haven't heard from him either.
I don't even know if he has a name.
Well, the name, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is Chris DiBarana Sarobi.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a mouthful.
And he's also a Democrat, by the way.
Oh, good. But we have not heard from him.
No, we haven't met him.
Or heard anyway.
You know, putting aside the details of the case now, and hopefully some progress finally being made, some inroads maybe that you can make now. For 13 years, it's been a stone wall. What's kept you going? A lot of people would say, you know, it would have given up a long time ago.
Ellen Greenberg was our daughter.
But
You don't give up on what you love.
every time you pursue this, every time you think about it, every time you contact your lawyer, every time you follow what the authorities are doing or not doing, you relive the anguish of the death of your daughter.
And every time we didn't do that, we would have it every day, every hour, every minute. So we feel we're better off the way we are.
Yeah.
We're doing something. We have a mission. We have a purpose.
Yeah.
It's not like we're in the little corner of the room with nothing to do, nothing to say, just crying over a lost daughter. We have a mission. And it's also come to light, some of what we're doing, which is for Ellen, may help somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've said in previous interviews together that this goes beyond your own case area. You know, as bad as it is for you to endure this, the way this was handled by authorities, it could be mishandled for any of us if we were in a similar situation.
We believe it has been. We've had people contact us and say it has been.
Yeah, no real investigation.
Not many, but there are some, and a lot of people don't want to be out there, don't want to, get involved.
Yeah. You know, 13,
We have gone farther in this type of case than anybody else ever has.
13 years later, when you think of Ellen, you know, what memories come to mind that are painful or joyful or just, you know, are always there?
Her big smile.
And you must think about what could have been if she did not.
That's the most painful part of it all, is all the things
That we're
she
missing.
could have had and that we could have been part of. And the fact that because certain individuals in Philadelphia feel they can make their own rules and not follow the law, can try to erase her existence. She's living on and has left a legacy that we are very proud of. And just because they want Ellen to disappear and pretend that it was a suicide, which is just bombastic.
It's a lie.
They're
It's a lie.
they expected us to leave and, you know, go underground years ago. And they found that they picked the wrong girl to murder. They picked the wrong parents to mess with.
And they believe that now, believe me.
Well,
They thought this would end in a couple of years. Us being in Harrisburg, them being in Philadelphia, them being all powerful and wealthy. I don't know who's involved in it exactly, but whoever it is thinks they had a lot of power, political
And there were a lot of fingerprints on this
case.
And there are a lot of people turning around and watching their backs.
Right.
Because they didn't do the right thing. And guess what? It's still time to do the right thing.
Even today.
Because guess what? The truth always comes out.
as long as it takes.
Right.
Seems to be.
And as long as I'm alive,
As long as we're alive.
well,
Either one of us.
right.
So-
This will be,
Actually, I actually believe right now we have a little bit of momentum. It seems that other people have joined in and volunteered to help us that I didn't know about until recently when I spoke to Mr. Pedrosa. And we're getting to be in court, maybe.
Mr. Pedrosa is a lawyer who's been on
But
this for a number of years now.
yes.
Joe Pedrosa, yeah.
Mhm.
So I guess in wrapping this up, we could safely say that no matter what, you are not giving up.
no, we're not. That's funny even to say that.
Yeah.
They know we're not giving up. They look over their shoulders every minute of every day.
So every lie that is made, the hole gets deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper.
Well, it's obvious that you're not giving up. It's obvious that you're still pursuing this with vigor, as painful as it may be, and you are determined to see this through to the end, which will be the truth emerging.
Right, justice for Ellen.
Okay, Sandy and Josh, once again, on 13th anniversary of the death of your daughter, thanks for joining us. And
Thank you, Larry.
Once again, I'd like to thank you and the other media who stood by us, Larry. Without the media and people like you, we would be nowhere. So thank you again.
well, thank you for your stamina and your bravery in standing up to what's been an assault on you and your mission here. So, folks, thanks again. We'll be talking again.
Be well, Larry.
Thank you.
Be well.
Greenberg family attorney Joe Pedrosa is with us once again to give us an update on where the case stands after 13 years after the brutal stabbing death of Ellen Greenberg. So, Joe, I know you're a busy guy. We'll kind of rush through this today. So, after 13 years, where is the case going now? Where does it stand?
Well, Larry, I'm very happy to say that we are finally, meaning the family, finally having access to the entire medical examiner's office's file in Philadelphia, as well as the police department's file. To date, we've probably received about, I would say 70% of both files. And it's been somewhat enlightening. And we're moving into what we call the deposition stage, where we can ask people pointed questions and, wait for their responses.
Now, what's in the police file that's finally been handed over that is new information that could be critical in proving what actually happened to Ellen Greenberg?
Well, there's information that I'm aware of, but unfortunately, Larry, I can't share all of that with you. But some of the new stuff that came out is we learned about the meetings that ultimately led to the change of the death certificate from a homicide to a suicide. And very interestingly, if you don't mind, I'm going to look at my notes to make sure I'm accurate. The meeting was a lot closer to the date of Ellen's death than was believed before. In fact, the chronology seems to indicate that Ellen's death was on January 26th. On January 28th, this is now the day after Dr. Osborne has declared Ellen's death to be a homicide, there was a meeting with representatives from the Philadelphia Police Department and the pathologist, Dr. Osborne, who declared it to be a homicide. We then know that literally 3 days later, there was a more extensive meeting with more representatives from the police department, Dr. Osborne, and now his boss, the medical examiner, Dr. Galino. And we know that 1 day later, Dr. Osborne contacts or at least one of the Philadelphia Police Department representatives to say that he's changing the death certificate or the manner of death from a homicide to a suicide. So it's a very more compressed time frame than what we had understood it to be, with what I would suggest is extremely limited information available to account for such a dramatic change from homicide to suicide.
Were you able to find out more about how Dr. Osborne was, quote, persuaded to change his initial finding of homicide to suicide in such short order?
Larry, it's suggested, and this is why we do depositions, but it's suggested at this time that the change was solely due to a claim that Ellen had the motor skills to administer all 20 stab wounds. In other words, she would not have been paralyzed or otherwise incapacitated. And the claim that she likely was desensitized or incapable of feeling the stab wounds at some point because of the one to her spine. I suggest that's ridiculous, but that seems to be the crux of why Dr. Osborne changed.
Okay, Joe, just a quick review for those who may not know all the details of her death. 20 stab wounds, 10 in the front, her chest, one right through the heart, 10 in the back, including in the upper spinal region by the base of the neck, which seems kind of difficult to self-administer, but beyond the mechanics of it, the physical mechanics, why do you find that not persuasive that she could have administered those herself?
Well, there is a summary by the police department, and this is how they describe 4 of those 20 wounds. They describe 3 significant, these are the words in the report, and I'm quoting, quote, 3 significant wounds to the chest, 1 into stomach cavity, entire length of the knife. Now, Larry, we're talking approximately 6 to 8 inch length blade Costco knife. 1 into liver, fatal blow into heart. Then it says, quote, 2 significant wounds to back of neck, 1 inward and outward into her head, 1 possibly into spinal cord area. You can ask any physician, they don't even have to be a surgeon. Any one of those wounds that was just described would incapacitate anybody who perhaps wasn't high on PCP or some other narcotic. And what we now know from a representative of the medical examiner's office is that the wound to the spinal column was done when Ellen was dead because there is no blood with that wound. So that's a post-mortem wound. Well, post-mortem by definition means you're dead, which means you could not self-administer it. So the whole logic of this falls apart.
Okay, but Joe, when it was reviewed by then Attorney General Josh Shapiro, did that office not conclude or claim that the pathologist that talked about it being post-mortem misspoke?
Well, that was a suggestion that was made, but the deposition transcript is now in the public domain, and I would suggest to any of your viewers that they go and check for themselves whether Dr. Emery was confused or otherwise less than direct in her statement. My recollection is that Dr. Emery, when asked point blank, her belief as to whether the wound was self-administered or Ellen was already dead and couldn't self-administer, and Dr. Emery said, in her professional opinion, it would be that Ellen was already dead and could not self-administer.
Well, you know, Joe, I know you can't be too specific here while the case is still being pursued, but from what you've told me of what I've learned from my own research in this case, it seems like a lot of officials could be easily accused or at least suspected of actual lying.
Well, that's certainly a position we have taken in this litigation, Larry. In particular, it has been our position that if you take the continuum of time, meaning from January 2011 all the way to today's date, and you look at the information that was available to officials and what they knew, somewhere everybody will reach agreement that suicide cannot be the manner of death. And then you have to ask yourself, why does it remain a suicide when nobody can reasonably or legitimately say this was a suicide? So,
in fact, Joe, the case that we should explain to our viewers that the case that you're now pursuing, you're charging 3 medical experts in the medical examiner's office in Philadelphia with actually conspiracy to cover up a murder, correct?
that's correct, Larry. And the reason is, if you take the information that was known to these 3 pathologists from 2011 all the way through to today's date, they knew from Dr. Emery saying this is a post-mortem wound, which automatically discounts suicide, to representations made by Dr. Galino to state police officers who interviewed him that if he knew what Dr. Emery was saying, you have to change the death certificate, to Dr. Mouse saying, or excuse me, Dr. Osborne saying, oh, well, I changed it because I was told 2 things, that the fiance was observed when he broke into the apartment and found Ellen in her condition. And we have proven definitively that the fiance was not escorted. When you take all of that into account, and then finally Dr. Osborne claiming that Dr. Lucy Rourke did an independent examination of the spinal cord and concluded that Ellen could have self-administered, and we have Dr. Rourke saying, I have no recollection, I never submitted a bill for my services, which I always do, and I never wrote a report. Well, if I didn't write a report, I didn't look at the specimen. When you put all of that together, you have to say to yourself, what is there other than a conspiracy to keep this a suicide?
So what you're saying is, or at least what you're implying is, that the officials actually made up what they claim was an examination by Dr. Rourke. It never happened, that they just made it up.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Okay,
and I'm also saying that somebody made up the claim that the fiance was escorted by the security guard. That's made up out of whole cloth. It simply did not happen, and everyone knew it from day one. It did not happen. Where'd it come from?
all right, Joe, now this is a civil case, but considering what you're attempting to uncover, and if you're successful in proving that they conspired to cover up a murder, doesn't this turn into criminal charges as well?
Well, it could potentially, particularly if it is that it was done to cover up a murder. I mean, there could also be another explanation, which is it was done to cover up just simply sloppy work by the Philadelphia Police Department and the medical examiner's office that they didn't want to have light shown on. But I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, it's a conspiracy. The effect of that conspiracy is to hide or protect a homicide. That's the ultimate effect.
Well, Joe, even if it was just to cover up their own incompetence or inattention or sloppiness, that in itself would be criminal, would it not?
I would think so, Larry. I seriously would think so, particularly in the medical examiner's office where the pathologists take an oath to only do that which is correct and which they believe in. And literally, when they sign off on reports, they're signing off saying that it's to the best of their knowledge, information, and belief, subject to possible prosecution for falsity of of a statement. So if they know, or should, or as far as I'm concerned, if they know and they do know that this cannot be a suicide, and yet are issuing death certificates of suicide and refusing to revisit it and do the right thing, how can that not be a violation of their oath?
At what stage are the depositions? Have they begun?
They will. It took an extensive period of time from November of 2023 to literally just a couple days ago to get the materials from the city. And I'm not being critical in that because we're looking at a file that is 13 years old and not stored in present manners of storage. So it took quite an effort for the city to put the file and that together, and we are appreciative of that. But you really can't go forward with depositions or asking people questions until you have all the information available to you to examine, in order to do a thorough job.
Can you tell us at least some of the people that will be deposed?
Well, I don't think it's a big secret. Guy DeAndrea is going to be witness number one.
And explain them as you go along, who these people are.
Sure. Guy is a former assistant district attorney in Philadelphia who, after Ellen's investigation was deemed to be a suicide, took a look at the file himself separately on his own, basically his own free time, looked at the file, examined all the materials in it, and reached a conclusion that Ellen's death was not a suicide and that the manner of death should be changed, and it should be changed to homicide. He did so predominantly, as I understand it, based on his own assessment of the wounds, the autopsy reports, the bruises that Ellen has on her body, which are unexplained, the inability to self-administer these wounds, just given their angles, the severity of the wounds, and the lack that a Dr. Lucy Rourke report was missing and never ever produced or otherwise accounted for. Those factors and others led him to conclude that this was a homicide. He even recommended that the district attorney's office open up the case. Unfortunately, that was under consideration right at the time he was leaving the office. And obviously, a new investigation never occurred, or a homicide investigation never occurred. So he's our number one person because, he looks at it through the eyes of a prosecutor. And if he sees it and can explain it that way, well, then how can anybody reach a conclusion that it's perfectly appropriate to call this a suicide? I mean, it's arbitrary and capricious then, meaning reasonable people would not conclude that. And he's our starting point. From there, we're going to talk to some of the police officers, in particular, Sergeant Sierra, who was the main sergeant in the investigation, possibly his lieutenant, and one more police officer. His name escapes me at this point. Then we will do the three pathologists at some point again, Dr. Galino, Dr. Emery, and Dr. Osborne for their depositions, because now we have new information. that we would like them to respond to. Under consideration perhaps might be other folks who are witnesses, depending upon whether we need them. That may be Mr. Schwartzman, who was present at the facility.
And he is who?
He's the uncle of the fiance, Sam Goldberg. To the extent we need his testimony or think it could be helpful, we may ask him.
He's also a lawyer, and wasn't he the president judge of the Judicial Ethics Committee?
That's my understanding, Larry, yes.
And you deposed him because he was, explain again where he was at the time.
He was in contact with the fiance, Sam, throughout the day and during the critical time periods of whatever happened to Ellen. And he also arrived on the premises later that night. And my understanding is the next day was actually in the apartment. So he has firsthand knowledge of its layout and physical conditions, and removed from the premises, I believe it was 3 laptops, 2 cell phones, Ellen's purse, which included her wallet.
And wasn't he also on the phone in communication with the fiance, Sam?
Yes. In fact, it's very clear that Sam, the fiance, was in contact with his uncle and talking fairly regularly during what I call the critical time period of, say, 4:30 to 6:45 at night that day.
So you'll be asking what the nature of those conversations were.
Yes, because see, that helps us then have a better understanding of what transpired with respect to Ellen. How he got into the apartment, the dynamics of it, all of this stuff adds in to the consideration of, is this a homicide or a suicide? One of the points, for instance, that Dr. Osborne, I just remembered, relied on is the fact that the flip lock inside was engaged at the time, locking the fiance out. And there's been some claim that the fiance had to break through the door in order to see Ellen in her condition before he called 911. The physical photographs taken that night, however, of the inner lock shows that it's still intact. And for your viewers, that means both posts, the one connected to the door frame and the one connected to the door, still remained intact. Well, if somebody broke through that door, one or both of those connections would have been dislodged. So that would discredit anybody breaking through the door. So it would be interesting to ask Sam, how did you get into the apartment if you didn't break through the door? Did somebody open it? Did Ellen open it? These are things that could be helpful in the puzzle of putting together what happened that night.
So you plan on deposing Sam as well?
Well, we may. It all depends upon our needs and how the other depositions go. The focus here, again, there, and I want to emphasize this, we're not proving a murderer. We're proving a murder. And then once that's proved and the death certificate is changed, then you can move to who among the general public is responsible for her death. And it may be more than one person. I don't know. This is a facility where there's a lot of people. So strange things do happen. So we're taking it one step at a time.
But Attorney Pedraza, it's been 13 years, so it's a cold case. What are the chances of investigating and finding out enough through the investigation to actually determine if there is a murderer and who it might be?
Well, Larry, I think you should spend more time watching some TV, because there's a lot of series based on cold cases that get solved many years later. I am very optimistic that we will see the end and we will find out who is responsible for Ellen's death, and that person or persons will be held accountable. I believe that.
Attorney Pedraza, I know you've got a very busy schedule as usual, so I'll let you go. But thanks once again for giving us an update on the Ellen Greenberg case, 13 years after her brutal death in a suburb of Philadelphia, a case that has never been given the proper attention or proper investigation. So Attorney Pedraza will be talking again. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Larry.